the ability to mandate vaccines and preventative treatment for individuals. Also other things, a bit of a list here: detain and quarantine individuals for up to 28 days, mandate the wearing of medical clothing, which presumably means things like face masks, force medical examinations and health monitoring, forcibly enter premises and confiscate belongings without a warrant, require children to be kept off school, close businesses and keep adults off work, breach medical confidentiality and privacy by allowing wide data sharing of patient medical information with various state bodies, require an individual to answer questions regarding their health status, require a person to attend training or advice sessions, and legislate as to where the person may go or with whom the person has contact. So that's quite the list. It all sounds pretty scary. So to shine a light on this, we are delighted to welcome Paul Frew. Paul is a member of the Legislative Assembly in Northern Ireland, and he was also one of the very few elected representatives speaking out consistently for freedom and against state overreach in the past few years. We'll welcome Paul in just a second. Just to say that on the call, we've got a number of Together members, and later on, we're going to try to go to some member questions for Paul. If you have questions you'd like to ask, please, and you're on this call, please type them into the chat. And if we have a chance, we can go to you later on. Also, let me know if you don't want to appear on camera, because I can read your question instead. That's the only other little bit of housekeeping. Yes, is if, unless you're speaking, if you could just keep your mic on mute, please, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And welcome also if you're watching the live stream of this call or the recording, which we're going to share after the event. I'm sure we'll have lots of people, not just from Northern Ireland watching, but actually from all over the UK, people who are concerned about this issue. So, Paul, over to you, turning to you. Could you just introduce yourself, please, for those that don't know you, and also just give a bit of context? What's the role of the Legislative Assembly in Northern Ireland, please?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to meet all you guys and to communicate with you. It's good that you have a group together, and I have always sought support and solace from the work that you guys have been doing. It's given me strength at times when I have felt lonely in these battles. So I commend you guys for the work that you do, because this has been a lonely fight, and there's a lot of people out there who think they're alone, but they're not. And that's the most important thing. Even through the dark days of the pandemic, when people were frightened, scared out of their wits, it was good to know that there were other people asking questions, raising issues, and basically fighting for our freedoms. And that's what it became. That's what it became. I suppose I have been an MLA, which is a member of the Legislative Assembly, which is the devolved government for Northern Ireland. The same way as Scotland has its government and Wales has its government, we're part of the devolved settlement in the UK. And I'm a member of North Antrim. So I represent North Antrim, which takes in the beautiful towns of Ballymena, Ballymoney, Ballycastle and Bushmills, and even the Giant's Causeway. And I hope you guys know that, a big tourist spot here in Northern Ireland. And I suppose when the pandemic first appeared, when we were getting the shocking scenes from China, from Italy, and governments were reacting in quick time, I think that we were all frightened into giving these powers to our Department of Health in all the respective areas, including Westminster. And out of that then came these atrocious measures which have caused so much harm to our people. And whilst we're all members of the UK, health was devolved. So individual health ministers and departments treated the measures that they had and the power that they had in different ways. And one thing I did realize was that with devolution, it seemed to be a race to the bottom. So if the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom suggested a lockdown measure, it was nearly as if the First Minister of Scotland, First Minister of Wales, and some of the parties in Northern Ireland here were intent and politically motivated to go harder, go faster into lockdown. And there was no scientific evidence to do that. It was just a political belief structure or temptation. And so in Northern Ireland, we had lockdowns. It took a long time to lift the original lockdown. They produced colour charts of steps in various levels of life and spheres of life. But I started to ask questions about why are we staying? First of all, of course, lockdown was it 15 days to flatten the curve? The hardest bit of those 13 days was the first 18 months. And it's sort of, we were stuck in lockdown and no one had the courage to say, right, I think we need to stop this nonsense now. And it trailed on and trailed on. And whenever people started to ask questions about, well, why are we still locked down? Do you not realize the damage that's being done to our vulnerable people, to our young people with regards to development, isolation, education? We eventually got to a place where we were opening up very tentatively and by stages. And then, of course, come the winter time, there was this talk of another surge with another strain, and we locked down again, closed down our schools. And it did tremendous damage to the point where I believe that a lot of the access deaths that we now experience in most of Western society and all around the world, I believe one of the aspects and causes of that excess death was lockdown philosophy and the deployment of fear. The deployment of fear piece was massive. It's probably the most severe instrument a government can use on its own people. And it scared people. It scared young people. It scared vulnerable people, people who were already isolating, people who had already health conditions that meant they were really worried about this virus. And they were scared into compliance, into regulations that did them more harm than good. And I do believe that's where we're at. And in Northern Ireland, we had lockdown, we had school closures. We were questioned by the police when we went 3 miles out of our villages and towns. They asked us where we were going to shop. They asked us, was that the closest place to shop? And then they had fixed penalty notices, whereby I have cases where a solo swimmer, a natural swimmer in the sea, was threatened by the police that if they entered the water and came back out again, a fixed penalty notice would be waiting for them. They were the only ones on the beach. I had cases whereby 3 grandparents, 2 parents, and a childminder was caught celebrating a first-year-old's birthday party. And they were all issued with fixed penalty notice of £250 each. So there straight away was over £1,000 out of a household because they dared to celebrate their grandchildren's and their children's first year birthday. It's unbelievable what the people were put through. And it's now been proven that all of those fixed penalty notices that were issued with it by the police who had actually gained entry to domestic premises, a lot of them, most of them now will be unsafe and should be challenged because we've had court cases since. So a lot of those, and I did feel sorry for the police in a lot of regards because the police, and it goes right across the United Kingdom, the constabularies that we have to protect us, they are not designed to police draconian law, but yet they were asked to do so. And in many cases, they got it wrong. And so this is the context in which we now live and the consequences of lockdown philosophy and the deployment of fear. And it's out of that context, we now have the proposals to bring forward a new public health bill in Northern Ireland.
That's a really good summary, Paul. Thank you. And yeah, let's talk a bit more about then this new proposed public health bill. So where has this come from? Where has this kind of originated from?
Well, there was a review a number of years ago, I think there was a review in just before the pandemic struck. So I think it was 2016, 2017, there was a general review of the public health bill, which our bill goes right back to 1967. So in itself, there's absolutely no problem with reviewing law, especially serious law. But I do think that with that review, the mindset of the Department of Health has completely and utterly changed because of the measures and the draconian power that they enjoyed and that they could implement over the pandemic period. And I think that has changed their mindsets as to how much they can push our people into complying with their draconian measures and their power. And that to me is a road to no town. I have been warning the people of Northern Ireland, and it's been a lonely fight at times, but I have been warning the people of Northern Ireland that the intent by the Department of Health was to make permanent their temporary powers that they enjoyed over the COVID pandemic. And what they have been doing, the COVID powers, the regulations give them the power for 2 years. But since that, they have been extending their powers every 6 months. And it was only in February last that the Assembly stood up and says, no more, Minister. And Robin Swan, the health minister at the time, brought forward his extension, expecting the Assembly and all the other parties in the mandatory coalition here in Northern Ireland to accept his proposals to extend for a further 6 months. And it was one party after the other that was starting to question it. And I'm glad to report that all the parties voted against that extension, except for the minister's own party, the UUP. So it was his powers ceased in February. But I suspect that what the Department of Health were going to do was extend and extend and extend their powers until they could bring in a new piece of primary legislation, which was called the Public Health Bill. And they could say to the people, all we're doing is making the powers that we currently enjoy permanent. And I'm glad now there has been this break and the ceasing of those draconian powers, because I do think that sets the bar, and the other parties now realise that what the powers that the Department of Health and the one person, the one Minister of Health had is not healthy, it's not democratic, and it's certainly not conducive to public health, good public health.
And who would you say is most influential in all this, Paul?
Well, interestingly, in the Department of Health and during the COVID period, the power resided with the Minister of Health, the one person who could and had the power to dream up a new regulation, to contact this department over breakfast, to have the regulation drawn up by the Bill Office, and to have it enacted by lunchtime, and to have it enforced before the evening time, and to have people being issued with fixed penalty notices before he even went to bed. That's the power that the Minister of Health had. But of course, he was seeking advice throughout the whole period by the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor, who were advising him the whole way through. And those people are, whilst they're respected positions, they're unaccountable because they're not elected. And if you have a minister who isn't good at scrutiny, who isn't good at standing up to their own departments, and I mean this in a general sense right across government and governance, then you're going to do what you're told without question. And so then you ask the question, well, where does the real power reside? And so that's what I worry about when there's power, draconian power, that you can create law in an instant, and you don't have to bring it to a body. You don't have to bring it to the Assembly. You don't have to bring it to a Parliament. You can enact and enforce law within a 24-hour period without having to get support or have a vote on it. Well, then I think that's really, really dangerous and really reckless in a democratic society.
Yeah, absolutely. And where are we in the process with this proposed new bill, Paul? If you just give us the big picture.
So we're currently going through a consultation on the new public health bill. Now, the consultation in itself isn't unique. Most governments, most departments will consult on any piece of primary legislation that they bring forward, and it's good and proper that they do so. But there is a shock to the system of Northern Ireland's population here over the last 3 weeks, and I'm glad to see it because I have been warning the people since this consultation was released on the 5th of July. I have been warning the people that the draconian powers that we were all subjected to over COVID, the department would make them permanent, and they have done damage to our people. And I was heavily criticised at the start because people were scared, people were frightened, and they were looking to me as if to say, "What are you doing? You're messing about with our health." And I'm saying, because these people are messing about with our democracy. And that's the biggest safeguard you have. People think that democracy is there to give people power, but democracy is actually there so that when we give people power, that ultimately we have a democratic, accountable system that can curb that power. And that's what the assembly is all about. But for you to be able, as a minister, to make law without having to come to the assembly, it's a farce. And so I was concerned from the very start, with regards to this. And I now realize, and I've realized a long time, that the deployment of fear is what they used to comply and to compel people, compel people to comply with these draconian measures. If you would have asked me 10 years ago that this would have happened and we would have lived through this, I would have said no. There's no way that people would fall for this. But you can see with the deployment of fear how real that was and how that came about. And so I do not think that any department, that any one person, or any unelected official should have the power ever again that they had during COVID, because our public health has been destroyed in many ways. We have excess deaths going through the roof. We've over 1,000 in Northern Ireland in any given calendar year since the pandemic. And we also had a measure in Northern Ireland called the Vaccine Certification Scheme, which coerced people to take a vaccine. And I don't care how good a medicine is, you should never be compelled to take a medicine that could cause adverse reactions and side effects. And so there are many people who I deal with on a weekly basis who have been injured by the vaccine and who cannot get a clear pathway to care, who are being ignored by government because it's an inconvenient truth to tell them that they have coerced these people into damage because they were coerced to take a medicine that gave them side effects. And so most politicians in Northern Ireland turn their face away. So I am really concerned about this proposed bill, and I'm now glad that the vast, well, not the vast majority, that an enormous amount of people are now contacting their MLAs and are energized about this public consultation, because the damage could be done. It is real. It is there, and if our voices aren't heard, the Department of Health will try and take these powers that they enjoyed over COVID and make them permanent.
Thank you. And what are the most troubling elements about this bill from your point of view, Paul? Just a few specifics, maybe.
So there are a number of elements to this. So it gives the PHA, the Public Health Agency, powers of entry to business. It gives them powers to issue fixed notices. It gives them powers to lay down fines. It gives those gives the PHA and other bodies that the Department of Health will deem fit, or the PHA will deem fit, to even prosecute head teachers, principals, if they don't give information over about children who the PHA deem or suspect to be contaminated or unwell. It gives them all of the suite of powers that they had during COVID, only worse. So whilst the COVID vaccine, the vaccine certification scheme coerced young people and other people to take the vaccine, and it prevented them, it discriminated against people who didn't. It meant that you had to test every 2 days to go along normal business, to enter premises, which was a nonsense because someone with the vaccine could walk straight into those premises and have COVID and spread it about. So there's no scientific basis for that, but it's bringing in those measures, but not only to coerce people to take a vaccine, but also to mandate them to take a vaccine. And that's probably the most frightening bit about this. But it also requires you to be retained in a hospital, to be removed to a hospital and then to be retained in a hospital or other suitable site, whatever that means. It imposes that you be kept in isolation or quarantine, whatever that means, wherever that would be. Isolated away from your family. And I've asked people to look at this not as black and white words on a piece of paper, but actually think about if their elderly mother or father or their daughter or their grandson happened to test positive for a virus that the government deems dangerous enough. And why I say test positive is because we know that with all of these measures around COVID, that the tests weren't reliable. And there were many people who tested positive that first of all had no symptoms, and second of all, didn't have the virus. So the tests weren't perfect. The tests weren't reliable, some people would argue. So if the PHA, the Department of Health, are going to classify people as being contaminated, how are they going to test them? And will that test be reliable? So that's the first thing. It also talks about dead bodies and what the PHA can do with dead bodies. It can isolate dead bodies. It calls them a thing, by the way. But it can also remove dead bodies. And of course, remember, during lockdown, we weren't allowed to attend funerals. We weren't even allowed to stand at the graveside in the open air and mourn with people, our friends, and even some of our wider family. So this is going to be replicated again. But of course, we know the statistics classified at the time that if you died, but you had tested positive, I think, within 28 days of dying, that you were a COVID statistic. You were down as a COVID death. Now, you could have been hit by a bus, you could have died from a gunshot wound, but you were still one of those statistics. So is the government telling me, is the Department of Health telling me now that those people who die of other causes and even other natural causes, that their loved ones won't be able to bury them appropriately, won't be able to see them, and won't be able to be in the same area as them? So some of this is actually quite shocking. And so I really worry that some of this could see the light of day. And so my party, I must say, and I'm very grateful for my party and the way they've supported me over the last number of years. My party has made the decision, it's our position at the minute, that this consultation should be pulled. It should be pulled completely, and that the new minister, because we have a new Minister of Health, Mike Nesbitt, leader of the UUP, and that Mike should look at this from a completely different direction from his predecessor, Robin Swan.
Okay, very, very interesting. Just sort of in the interest of balance, Paul, do you see anything good in this proposal?
There's bound to be. There is bound to be, and let me just say that it's perfectly normal to refresh law. I have absolutely no problems with that. We were living with a 1967 Act, and there's absolutely nothing with having a look and a review on a piece of elderly legislation. But sometimes those pieces of legislation is fine. The wording might need to be updated, but there's no way that within the public health bill there should be measures that will actually lead to the hurting of public health, which we have seen and witnessed over the COVID period. So it's basically an oxymoron now to call this the public health bill, because this, I believe, will do much more damage to public health than any virus would do if it's similar to what we've experienced over COVID. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have measures to protect the people with regards to dangerous pathogens. Absolutely not. But that has to be measured by our individual and personal freedoms. And the proposals that are laid out in this consultation are nowhere near balanced. They're absolutely not nowhere near balanced. But I had a laugh to myself because in the public consultation, they talk about safeguards. And so the wording, for example, they add safeguards for the public health protection regulations in that they may not create an offence punishable with a fine exceeding £10,000, which is remarkable. So there you go. There's your safeguard. So there are fines within this that give you a £500 fine, a £1,000 fine, but there's your safeguard, folks. We're not going to be able to fine you any more than £10,000. And also we have to remember is some of this is you get your fine, and then for every day you don't comply, you get a further fine. So, you could get £1,000 fine, a business could get £1,000 fine, a person could get £1,000 fine if they don't comply with the restrictions around a dead body. And then every day after that, it's £500. And then they're telling us there's a safeguard and that they won't exceed £10,000, which to me is just mesmerizing. The potential to do grave damage to businesses, to lock them down, to shut a person's business, just like overnight, without any explanation, without any real evidence to suggest that would be suitable to combat that virus, or that there would be evidence base to close businesses down. It's just remarkable that we're in this age where we're having to contend with the spectre of a public health bill that will hurt public health.
Yeah, incredible stuff. And if we can just home in on the consultation a little bit as well, Paul, because what I noticed about it, there are something like 50 questions in the consultation. It's based on this, 79-page, legal document. And many of the questions seem quite technical. It actually says on page 1, we're keen to hear from those who have an interest in health protection, especially those with a professional interest. And does all this give the impression it's not really designed for the public? We see in other areas around the UK, we've seen consultations that contain loaded questions, or they seem deliberately designed to get certain responses, or even just deter members of the public from responding at all. I'm not saying that's the case here, but what's your read of this consultation specifically?
No, I think that's a fair criticism. I have been an MLA, full-time politician, since 2010. I've been involved in part-time politics since 2005. And I don't think I have ever read a consultation document that was easy, first of all, to follow, and secondly, easy to fill in if you're a member of the public. I'm an electrician by trade, 20 years in the game, 10 years a foreman. People sometimes ask you what university I went to. I say I went to my university was the Building Sites of Belfast. So for an ordinary person, it's very hard to actually read an official government document, let alone try and understand it and fill it in. So it is a fair criticism that I make quite a lot in every art and part of government, in every department, that their consultations aren't really designed for a public intervention, and that they are designed for certain sectors and certain professionalisms and certain expertise. But that's not necessarily the right way to do it, because when something is so important as public health that has affected every single one of us and every single one of our family members, I think it's only right and proper that they would have took a different course or a different action on this public health bill, given what we have lived through and given how we've been affected. And I think they could have made it easier for the public to respond, but they haven't. And I think what they're getting now is they're getting heat. There's a massive run, I believe, from ordinary members of the public trying to respond. And even if you can't or you don't have the time to go through all of the pages, all of the 50 odd questions, some of which are quite opaque and vague, then, just write a personal, heartfelt letter of what you have experienced throughout COVID and why you wouldn't think that that would be a good idea leading into the future, and the damage that it has done. And just write an ordinary letter to the Department of Health through the channels in which they advertise. What I would guard against, and I understand why people do this, because people are busy, people maybe haven't the ability, but I would guard against a petition type template letter or even a petition, because government departments just bat those away so easily. They basically just bat them away as a petition type letter that somebody has signed the bottom of, just like you would do with a petition. And then, of course, they rubbish petitions because, okay, there's 10,000 signatures in this, but do these people realize what's the detail of the bill, the proposed bill? And so they rubbish that too. And of course, there's nothing to stop the Department of Health, if they are determined enough, to ignore the consultation responses in any consultation. And there has been history in the past that departments have done that here in Northern Ireland. And I'm sure it's the same in Westminster, and I'm sure it's the same in Scotland and Wales. So I do believe that the Department of Health are determined to bring in these draconian measures onto a permanent footing.
Yeah, worrying. And the consultation deadline has been extended by 2 or 3 weeks, I see, to 14th of October now. Is there any particular reason for that?
I think they've been shocked. I think the energizing of the population into the intent of the department has shocked the people, but now it has shocked, and I would say maybe not the department, because the department will have a plan. But I think the new minister, who's only in post a matter of months, I think he's been shocked, to be fair. I've been getting hundreds of communications, emails, phone calls, and to be honest with you, Rob, I can't get through them all. And so I'll rely on my social media to basically communicate with the people. And I've resisted going to everyone who's emailed me until I can give them the concrete return from my party, the consultation response from my party. Once I have that in my hands, I will issue that to everyone who's contacted me. But and the Diane Dodds, Alan Robinson, and our policy team are doing a tremendous good job at the minute working on that and going in through the detail. So I commend them on that. But I do think that the new health minister has been stung by the level of interest in this consultation, and stung into some of them, into communicating to the public on some of the measures. The new health minister has already come out to say that he would be opposed to compulsory vaccination, mandatory vaccination. So the question I would pose, because it's the minister's name on the consultation, why would he have let that go out in the consultation document if he is opposed to it? So I do think he has been stung, and rightfully so. And it's a democratic process. So let's hope that he listens, and that he can bring a public health bill which will garner the support of the Assembly, but also libertarians like me.
Very good. So we're going to go to some questions for Paul. So if you have a question for Paul and you're on the Zoom call with us, you're a Together member, if you can put your question in the chat, please, and then we're going to see how many questions we can get to for Paul. So just while people are doing that, a couple of things, maybe just reiterate, Paul, if we've already mentioned this, but if people are concerned about this, what action can they take? And let's talk about people who live in Northern Ireland first of all, and then we'll see if there's anything people in the rest of the UK can do. But what practical steps would you advise them to take?
So read as much of the consultation as you can. Be briefed. Take advice of what's the measures are proposed in the consultation. And even if you want to centre on 1, 2, or 3 of those proposals, then write a heartfelt letter, personal letter to the Department of Health through the various email addresses that they offer up in the consultation document. And that way, at least you will have responded to the consultation. If you are at this point only starting to read the consultation, and you've only got to the 14th of October and everyone is busy in their own lives and their own family lives and their own work, I suggest you're not going to get through it. So that's where I think you write a letter, a personal letter of your concerns to the health minister. And then let's see the consultation report from the department after they've assessed the responses will then have to go to the health committee in Stormont. And that health committee scrutinises and advises the department with regards to policy. So they will want to see all of the responses and the types of responses and how those responses direct to all these measures. So the committee will ask questions like, so how many people mentioned the mandatory vaccinations? How many people mentioned the lockdown ability, about closing businesses, about what you do with a dead body? Quarantine, what does that mean? How many people responded to that? And then that's when the Committee for Health will start to form a view, but they won't be able to form a view, nor will I, nor will the Assembly, until we actually see the text of the blue pages of that public health bill. And that's in the gift of the health minister when he brings that forward. But I would suggest that the health minister has to take a good, hard look at what he is actually proposing in his consultation document.
Okay, that's great. And there will be lots of people who are not in Northern Ireland, but they're in the rest of the UK who are really concerned about this as well. Is there anything they can do?
Yeah, I think they be vigilant in their own jurisdictions. We already know a lot of these measures have actually been inserted into Scotland. And there's some read across from Scottish legislation proposed in this consultation. We know that some of the lockdown measures in Wales were very harsh. And of course, we know the power that Westminster has with regards to the Department of Health. And of course, in GB, they mandated vaccinations for healthcare workers. Was it 30,000 staff lost their job? So we have to be vigilant right across the United Kingdom on this stuff. And I think what happens is if one jurisdiction gets them in, then the others justify it by saying, well, look, Northern Ireland has this power, or Scotland has this power, or, we may as well have this power because Westminster can do it anyway over our heads. So I do think there are concerns there for the whole of the UK with regards to our individual personal freedoms.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you. So looks like Hugh McCarthy, you have a question, Hugh?
Yeah. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Hugh.
Good to see you, Paul. Well done. You have been, like myself, speaking up for the last 4 years. We both opposed school closures, and we continue to speak out in a lonely place. As you rightly pointed out, if the rest of the people do not support us, it'll come to a country near them. We are trialing the international health regulations, as you well know, 6 and 6. They're all there in these draconian legislation. Just look at the verbs, people. I have a multi-question, Paul. Mike Nesbitt said that he was opposed to compulsory vaccinations. That doesn't, of course, mean that he's opposed to vaccine passports, because strictly speaking, that's a choice. Last time you didn't have to take a vaccine as long as you didn't want to go to school, go to work, go to a bar, play sport. So it isn't compulsory in that sense. So we need to tease out what he means by opposed to compulsory vaccinations. What we're concerned about, as you know, is the denial of civil liberties due to the vaccine passport scheme, which, as you know, cost £21 million. So that's question one. Do you know his view on that, vaccine passports? Question two, as far as I'm aware, and so I'm asking you, are you aware, there has been no risk versus benefit analysis, either now or in the past. The risk to children was non-existent. The youngest person to die here was 38. So why exactly did we close schools? What was the risk? So do you know of any risk benefit analysis? And the third and final point was, you talked about a review of policy. That was a review of the previous health policy. Before you introduce the most draconian laws in our history, you should at least review the success or otherwise of how they worked during the last time. So to the best of my knowledge, and perhaps you could answer, has there been any review of how masks, lockdowns, track and trace, PCR tests, vaccine passports, how did they work the last time before you introduce it again? Is that been done? So I'm three questions in one, Paul. So that the people know the answers to these.
Yeah. So I'll start from the top. I'll start from the latter one there, the review of how they worked. I don't believe there's any review, any suitable, honest review being conducted by any department, not least Department of Health, of how the measures that they introduced during the pandemic worked. Because if they did, they would come to a very scary conclusion that they diminished public health. They hurt our people. Look at their levels of anxiety. Look at the levels of depression. Look at the numbers of school children missing 50% of school and 80% of school. That has doubled. Each one of those measures have doubled because of lockdown. So I don't think there's any review. But I'll tell you what they do. They hide behind the COVID inquiry. So no matter what you think of the COVID inquiry and how it's conducting its business, each department will say, and the Department of Health will say, right across the United Kingdom, will say, we're awaiting the conclusion of the COVID inquiry. Now that works both ways. So we can say to Mike Nesbitt, why are you pushing forward with a new public health bill when you have not yet seen the findings of the COVID inquiry, but you have not done any sort of review of the draconian measures you brought in the first place? And I think for them to do that review and be honest about it, I think there'll be a lot of contrite hearts in the Department of Health. And I just don't see that happening, Hugh, because they'll be culpable, because they will be culpable for the damage that they have done to our people, to our young people who haven't developed properly, to our toddlers who seen people behind masks for months, for our elderly folk who were isolated on their own, and the only comfort they had was a TV screen that pumped out death figures on a daily basis. There's a lot of culpability about, and they don't want it. They don't want it in the Department of Health. Your second question around risk and benefit analysis. The ministers, the Department of Health brought forward these measures without having any evidence whatsoever. They had modeling, and the modeling was flawed. It was absolutely flawed. So there is no analysis taking place there was no analysis taking place during COVID. I was on the executive for 3 weeks as Minister of Economy, and I seen how to operate it, and there was no analysis. It was only modelling, and it was flawed modelling. With regards to Mike Nesbitt's position on the vaccine passports, all we have is the fact and the knowledge that the UUP supported vaccine certification. And they justify that spend. They justify that 21.5 million. A vaccine certification or passport does nothing but coerce and discriminate. So they spent 21.5 million on a discrimination tool to coerce mostly young people, but people into getting a vaccine that could cause them severe adverse reactions. And we have seen that with regards to the level of yellow card reporting in Northern Ireland, where there's over 5,000 reports of serious adverse reactions. And something like 57, I can't remember I haven't got the up-to-date figure, but I think it was 57 deaths reported to the yellow card scheme. So, there's a lot to contemplate here, but I would hope that Mike Nesbitt would see sense on this stuff. I would hope that he would see the damage that vaccine certification did. It was probably the most draconian measure they brought in here, and it did a lot of damage to a lot of people. And those people are now being ignored. And with that, and I warned them at the start when they brought it in, I warned them that this would hurt confidence in medicine. If they coerce people to take medicine, it would hurt confidence in medicine. And I think you see that being played out year in, year out with regards to levels of people now taking the COVID-19 vaccination, but also the levels of people taking other vaccinations. And so I think there's been a lot of damage done. Now, I have hope that Mike Nesbitt can turn this around, can turn his party around, and can turn the Department of Health around, but it will take him to be right, and it will take him to be strong in that department, because there are officials in that department who are going headlong into having and wanting these draconian powers. And that's wrong. But it's up to Mike, first and foremost, to stop it. And if he won't stop it, it's up to the Assembly then to vote against it.
Very good. Thank you. Good questions, Hugh. Peter Milligan, you have a question, I think. Can we see Peter? I can't see Peter at the minute. Sorry, guys. Can't see Peter. Maybe I'm doing something wrong here, but I can read Peter's question. Yeah, well, so Peter's a couple of questions. So he says they're trying to bring these same rules into other countries, for example, New Zealand, Scotland. Have any countries progressed further than Northern Ireland, positively or negatively?
So what I know is Scotland has some of this stuff already in. And we do know that even before the COVID pandemic, there were different levels in the different devolved regions. So, you could imagine that maybe Wales conducted a review of their Public Health Act 10 years ago, Scotland maybe 5 years ago, and that wouldn't have been abnormal. So they're all sitting at different levels. And that was one of the issues around Westminster bringing in the Coronavirus Act and then it being sprinkled down into the devolved regions, because it meant different things for different regions. Bit technical, I know. And of course, during COVID, with the concerns that I have for Little Northern Ireland, I was seeing the damage that was being done in Canada, in New Zealand, in Australia, in various different degrees and various different aspects, whether it be lockdown, whether it be quarantining people, whether it be removing people from their families and putting them into basically camps that was makeshift. Look at the way a tennis player, can't remember his name, was treated in Australia. So you have all these different things around the vaccine, and you have all these different measures around lockdown, and the draconian powers that come in was sweeping. And you became, when you tried to question the measures because you were concerned about the impacts of them, you were deemed to be dangerous. You were deemed to be dangerous. And you became the pariah, not the person with the draconian powers that were affecting people's health. It was you that was being the dangerous one for questioning. How dare you question these laws that are needed? So even the whole language around the pandemic scared me. It horrified me. And it was as if I was living a dystopian novel, living through it. And we could see it even in America. And you've seen how quickly Boris Johnson changed. And that's why I have no real confidence in democratic structures now, because you had Boris Johnson coming out strong. He was talking about herd mentality or herd immunity, and he was talking about staying strong and we'll get through this. And you had chief medical officers saying the same. And then of course Italy happened, and then of course America happened, and we sort of knew that once America happened, they would soon turn tail here. And so it proved within days. And all of the science that they were holding up on just basically became straw men, and they completely changed tact. And I suppose that's why we're quite, and I will mention them because the question is a global question. I think we need to mention Sweden for the work that they did and how they held their nerve. And that's the beacon. I think Sweden is the beacon for us here, for normal people in society, and for libertarians like myself. I think we really value the fact that Sweden held out and have been proved to be right all along.
Yeah, it's a good point, and yeah, I think sometimes also people on our side, if I can call it that, do tend to forget when the lockdown happened in England. There was a lot of public demand for it. Let's face it. There was a lot of that came from the public. It wasn't like it was imposed on much of the public. Much of the public was actually begging for it.
But so that's a science. So this is why the deployment of fear is so fierce and so damaging. Because when you're scared, you hunker down. When you're scared, you will crawl up into a ball. And that's what the government knew would happen. And that's why they deployed fear. And no matter what the damage they did, that's what they did. And now we're living with the consequences in every single sphere of governance and every single sphere of life, everyday life. We are dealing with the consequences of lockdown philosophy and the deployment of fear.
Absolutely. Good point. So just got one from Belinda here. She says, how are such poorly researched proposals able to gain traction and be brought into law?
So hopefully they won't be brought into law.
Yeah.
Because the one ingredient that's now missing is what I've just talked about, fear. So when people look at these measures in the cold light of day, and they consider how these measures would affect their elderly parent, their siblings, their daughter, and their grandchildren, and even their friends, then I think people will take a far better look at this than they did over COVID. And I think that the people will come to a better conclusion, I think, than the officials in the Department of Health on many of these things. And let's hope that sense prevails.
Absolutely. Really good, Paul. So we're just coming up to time. Where can people find you online, Paul, if they want to keep up with what you're doing?
So a lot of people remark on my Twitter account. And on that, you'll always get up-to-date information of what I'm doing. my fears and concerns around draconian law. I have libertarian values, which I champion. They'll also see my work in the Assembly Chamber and the Finance Committee scrutiny committees work. And they'll also see a lot of pictures of mountains, and because I'm into my photography and hill walking, mountain climbing. So there's a wee bit for everybody on my Twitter feed. And also I have 2 Facebook accounts. I can't even remember the handles of them, but you'll find me if you put in Paul Frew. You'll find me MLA Paul Frew. You'll find me okay. And I will go on to TikTok eventually, but just not yet.
Just not yet. Yeah, maybe next week or something. Paul, this has been really, really helpful, and we really appreciate you taking the time with us this evening. You know, not only for this evening, but for being very outspoken in favour of freedom these last few years. You know, when so many others have been anything but. I just want to say as well, thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. We have some more info on this issue. If you go to togetherdeclaration.org/NI, as in Northern Ireland, so togetherdeclaration.org/NI, we're going to update that a bit in light of what Paul suggested tonight in terms of writing to the Health Secretary a personal letter. We'll try to help people out and guide people about, you know, where they can do that. So that once again, that's togetherdeclaration.org/NI. And if you aren't yet a Together member, please join us. Our membership is how we're able to keep going and you know, work on issues, raise awareness on issues like this. And you can do that at togetherdeclaration.org/join, or just find our website and look for the link at the top of the screen. But once again, Paul, been excellent. Thank you so much. Really good.
Well, thank you for the invite. It means a lot to me. And just to repeat, when we go through our darkest periods and our loneliest periods fighting this stuff, we look for support. And I must say, throughout the years together has been immense, and has, even though we don't necessarily directly engage, the fact that you're there, the fact that you're doing so much good work and campaigning against these draconian measures and asking questions why and asking for evidence means a lot. It really means a lot to the people who are fighting in their wee arts and parts around the United Kingdom, and may I even suggest around the world. So you've certainly done my heart good tonight. So thank you, Rob.
That's great, really kind. And, you know, onwards and upwards together. Let's keep pushing. Let's see what we can do about this public health bill and, you know, all the other issues that we face. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.